Last lesson, we examined the role of the entrepreneur in innovation. This makes sense, seeing that classic scholarly works refer to the entrepreneur as the major source of and impetus for innovation. In these works, entrepreneurs are described as more than just business owners, which is the common understanding of entrepreneurship in the literature. So we clarified what we mean by an entrepreneur in this class. In our brief review of celebrity entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs have characteristics in common that seem to predispose them to innovate. How celebrities entrepreneurs view the world and opportunities, their beliefs about action, how they get people on side, seem to be clusters of characteristics that distinguish them from the quote, rest of us. Of course, this raises the question of whether these entrepreneurial characteristics can be learned, or whether some people are just born with these inherent capabilities and clusters of characteristics to become entrepreneurs. Evidence seems to suggest that yes, entrepreneurs do seem to display certain characteristics that contribute to their success. And this has created a slew of suggestions that business schools have no business teaching entrepreneurship. Yet increasingly, there's also recognition that while business schools cannot teach you to be born as an entrepreneur, they can teach you skills associated with being entrepreneurial. And increasingly, there's recognition that people can change their mindsets with focus and attention based on cognitive psychology sort of literature. In this vein, this lesson focuses on where ideas come from. And our purpose here is to seek insights on how they can be generated for the purpose of innovation, whether or not you are a born innovator, according to our definitions examined last week. It's probably not surprising that there are about a gazillion ideas of where ideas come from, how they get into an organization or a firm, and how they take hold and become products, services, improvements to processes internal to an organization, etc. Ultimately, we can divide perspectives into two broad categories. We have the social deterministic school and the individualistic school. The social deterministic school of thought holds that innovation comes from external origins, that one needs to look towards the demographic, cultural, and economic shifts like Porter described in his article, and we've started to look at in preparation for our assignment 1. When conditions are right in this external environment, innovations will occur. This market view essentially suggests that by being oriented towards the external environment, opportunities will have the opportunity to arrive and innovations will naturally occur. Assuming that companies can see the opportunities in the market, innovation should really flourish based on this perspective. This purely outward orientation assumes that firms can sort of sit and wait and then notice opportunities as they occur because they originate in the external environment. Then they can exploit these opportunities to generate innovative solutions and innovations. The individualistic school, on the other hand, holds that innovation derives from internal origins, unique talents within the firm, resources within the firm that all contribute to that firm's ability to innovate. So rather than innovation being something that spontaneously happens in response to external conditions, the individualistic school holds that it's based on internal resources to an organization or a firm. Innovation in this perspective is created actively and proactively, and is not really referenced against the external environment. This view of innovation is similar to the resource-based view, or derives from the resource-based view that was discussed in the strategy class, where we talked about Barney and Werner Felt and their perspective that unique internal skills are the key to organizational success, or in this case, innovation, as long as they meet the requirements of being VRINCO, valuable, rare, inimitable, non-substitutable, known, and organized. If these resources are VRINCO resources, they can lead to advantages in innovation or otherwise. From these social deterministic and individualistic perspective, numerous models of innovation have emerged. These all have different perspectives on where innovation originates, where ideas come from, and how innovation works. The slide shows a few of these models so that you have some idea of what they include. You certainly don't have to memorize these. One sort of perspective on where ideas come from is that it comes from luck. Luck would refer to things like accidental discovery. Many scholars, however, discredit this idea that luck plays a role. As Louis Pasteur said, chance favors a prepared mind. So rather than it being luck, the ideas emerge based on a firm and complete knowledge of a subject matter. Somewhat related to Bill Gates, the comments I made on Bill Gates last class in that documentary about his mind works, he described going to the cabin all week with books on different subjects to read. And we understand that through that reading, and often books that were unrelated to his primary field of knowledge, he was showing not only a capability to derive deep knowledge about particular areas, but also to demonstrate general curiosity and awareness of a wide range of ideas from a wide range of fields. So the jury's out. Does luck matter, or is this really about chance favoring a prepared mind? A prepared mind created through general knowledge, curiosity, and generalized reading. Then we have linear models of innovation. If we look at the science base or research institutions, technological innovations by industry, and the need of the market in tandem. So in this perspective, we're looking at what research institutions are doing. We're looking at the technological innovations that happen in an industry, and we're looking at the market needs. And by the intersection of those three ideas, we can find new ideas. This very sequential model begins with the customer and then essentially pushes innovations to them or pulls it from them. I.e., if the customers are the ones with the ideas, then that gets pulled into the organization. But through the acknowledgement, through acknowledging what research institutions, what's happening technologically in terms of innovation in the industry, and by looking at the needs of the market, companies can also push innovations to the customer. In other words, in these linear models, the customer is often the inspiration for the product or service or the recipient of it. In models of architectural innovation, incremental changes involve small changes to existing products and services in a developmental sort of stage-wise fashion, whereas radical innovation requires major system changes in order to support the new innovation. Industry incumbents, it's said, those are the people who are currently playing within an industry, will have a hard time changing their existing infrastructure and method of work to support radical innovations. You can imagine that this would be a dramatic change. For instance, if we look at the front desk of a hotel, it requires a different mindset to replace all of the front desk agents with computers and then to have resource people at the front from the current model that has individuals sitting and helping customers as they come into the hotel. This requires a complete change to the front end of what a hotel looks like, and what customers assume will happen. So the architectural innovation piece refers to the idea that newcomers in an industry will have a much easier time adapting their architecture to new innovations, whereas in some organizations, outdated architecture may be difficult to change and not necessarily support new innovations and ideas. And finally, we might want to look at an interactive model. This was the one in the 80s and 90s, which involved iterative conversations between the organizations, research institutions, and the market to result in innovation. In this particular view, there's an interplay between the different parties who are involved in the innovation process. And if the process of iteration, which going back and forth with ideas, is managed effectively, there'll be innovation success. Now, the details of each of these models is not really that important, but I do want you to see that there are a variety of different perceptions for where innovation comes from and where ideas come from, or what types of innovation is even necessary. So these models' details don't matter as much as our recognition that there are a number of models with different ideas of how innovation happens, who's involved, and how successful innovations come to be. The models of innovation we've been considering are fairly academic in nature, focused on how innovations happen and where ideas come from or where they originate. We have no clear conclusions about where ideas come from, though the literature has traditionally privileged environments with close ties to research labs or R&D labs, like in product manufacturing, or more scientific, like pharmaceutical environments. It's no surprise in this view that the inspiration for new ideas seems to be perceived to have come from these research institutions and labs, universities, etc., through industry and through industry competition and through markets and customers. In many of these processes, the organization's R&D department has been seen as an isolated entity that's sort of looking for clues from industry and customers to determine the next steps to explore in the lab. Drucker states that innovative business ideas arrive through the methodical analysis of 7 areas of opportunity. Within a company or industry, opportunities can be found in unexpected occurrences, incongruities of various kinds, process needs, or changes in the industry and market. Outside a company, opportunities arrive from demographic changes, changes in perception, and new knowledge. You read this article by Drucker already last week, and it's applicable here as well, because in this article, Drucker similarly not only outlines the entrepreneurial role, but also outlines where ideas come from and where opportunities arise. As I said last week, we're going to be using that article for your first assignment. So if you haven't already read it and signed up for a group, now would probably be a very good time to do that. There are some limitations to the existing model of innovation that we've studied or that have been studied so far. The dominant model really privileges this idea of sequential processes or linearity. The idea that an R&D lab looks outwards to get inspired, then brings ideas inward, develops them, and creates prototypes, and then eventually products for a market. The reality is, innovation seems to be a really messy, nonlinear process with iterative stages and paths. Iteration, in this case, in case you don't know, means sort of a back and forth discussion rather than finishing a stage and then not being able to go back to it in the process. Further, a scientific view of innovation persists and dominates, resulting in a focus on research and development, or R&D, and not other forms of non-technological innovation. For example, service, like we're interested in. Third, interactions between new technological capabilities and emerging social needs are fundamental to the innovation process, but not well understood. Fourth, innovation models are disconnected from the strategic thinking of the firm, isolated in the R&D department rather than being filtered across the organization. We started this class by talking about how innovation has a very, very strong strategic role, not only for an organization, but from an economic perspective. So it's pretty important that we find a way to fuse innovation with the strategy understanding that we have developed already. And then finally, the current models really do underplay the role of the individual. We spent a whole lesson last lesson talking about the role of the entrepreneur that's suggested to happen within innovation. Yet much of the innovation literature really does focus on more generically the R&D labs and research institutions, the industry and competition and the market, and not really on the individual and how the individual entrepreneur in the organization or outside contributes to this larger innovation. Further, as noted, given models tend to look at innovation as proprietary and very private, whereas the current literature seems to really privilege this idea of sharing and being far and wide about getting ideas, interacting with other organizations. We're going to explore some of these other models as we go along. So clearly the innovation literature itself cannot do justice to the question of where do ideas come from on its own, given its limitations. So let's step back. We understand ideas are useful, valuable, key to progress, key to innovation, but what are they and where do they come from? In his book, How to Get Ideas, Jack Foster, an advertising professional, explores the concept of an idea. And I'll read an excerpt from this book. So Foster begins, quote, "Before we figure out how to get ideas, we must discuss what ideas are. For if we don't know what things are, it's difficult to figure out how to get more of them. The only trouble is, how do you define an idea? A.E. Housman said, I can no more define poetry than a terrier can define a rat, but both of us recognize the object by the symptoms which produces in us. Beauty is like that too. So are things like quality and love. And so, of course, is an idea. But when we're in the presence of an idea, we know it, we feel it. Something inside us recognizes it. But try to define one. Look at dictionaries and you'll find everything from that which exists in the mind, potentially or actually, as a product of mental activity, such as a thought or knowledge. 2. The highest category, the complete and final product of reason. 2. A transcendent entity that's a real pattern of which existing things are imperfect representations. A lot of good that does you. Here are some answers I got from my coworkers and my students at the University of Southern California when asked to define an idea. It's something that's so obvious that after someone tells you about it, you wonder why you didn't think of it yourself. An idea encompasses all aspects of a situation and makes it simple. It ties up all the loose ends into one neat knot, with that knot being called an idea. It's an immediately understood representation of something universally known or accepted, but conveyed in a novel, unique, or unexpected way. Something new that can't be seen from what preceded it. It's that flash of insight that lets you see things in a new light, that unites two seemingly disparate thoughts into one new concept. An idea synthesizes the complex into the startlingly simple. Foster continues, it seems to me that these definitions, actually they're more descriptions than definitions, but no matter, they get to the essence of it, give you a better feel for the elusive thing called an idea. For they talk about synthesis and problems and insights and obviousness. The one that I like best, though, and in the one that's basis of this book, is the one from James Webb Young. Quote, an idea is nothing more, nothing less than a new combination of old elements. There are two reasons I like it so much. First, it practically tells you how to get an idea. For it says that getting an idea is like creating a recipe for a new dish. All you have to do is take some ingredients you already know and combine them in new ways. It's as simple as that. Not only is it simple, it doesn't take a genius to do it, nor a rocket scientist, nor a Nobel Prize winner, nor a Nobel artist or poet laureate, or an advertising hotshot or a Pulitzer Prize winner, or a first-class inventor. To my mind, wrote the scientist and philosopher Jacob Bronowski, it's a mistake to think of everyday activity as something unusual. It is a mistake to think of creative activity as something unusual. Ordinary people get good ideas every day. Every day they create and invent and discover things. Every day they figure out ways to repair cars, sinks, doors, to fix dinners, to increase sales, to save money, to teach their children, to reduce costs, to increase production, to write memos and proposals, to make things better or easier or cheaper. The list goes on and on and on. Second, I like this definition because it zeroes in on what I believe is the key to getting ideas, namely combining things. Everything I've read about ideas talk about combining or linkage or juxtaposition or synthesis or association. It is obvious, wrote Jacques Hadamard, that invention or discovery, be it in mathematics or anywhere else, takes place by combining ideas. The Latin verb cogito, for to think, etymologically means to shake together. When a poet's mind is perfectly equipped for its work, wrote T.S. Eliot, it's consistently amalgamating disparate experiences. The ordinary man's experience is chaotic, irregular, fragmentary. The latter falls in love or reads Spinoza, and these two experiences have nothing to do with each other or with the noise of the typewriter or the smell of the cooking. In the mind of the poet, these experiences are always forming new wholes. A man becomes creative, wrote Bronowski, whether he's an artist or a scientist, when he finds a new unity in the variety of nature. He does so by finding a likeness between things which were not thought alike before. The creative mind is a mind that looks for unexpected licenses. Or, listen to Robert Frost. What is an idea? If you remember only one thing I've said, remember that an idea is a feat of association. Or Francis H. Cartier, there is only one way in which a person acquires a new idea, by the combination or association of two or more ideas he has into a new juxtaposition in such a manner as to discover a relationship among them which was not previously aware. Nicholas Negroponte agrees. Where do new ideas come from? That's simple, from differences. Creativity comes from unlikely juxtapositions, and Arthur Koestler writes an entire book, The Act of Creation, based on the thesis that creative originality does not mean creating and originating a systematic idea out of nothing, but rather out of combination of well-established patterns of thought, by process of cross-fertilization, by association, the creative act. in which you uncover, select, reshuffle, combine, synthesize already existing facts, ideas, faculties, skills. Feats of association, unexpected license, new wholes shake together, then select among, new likely juxtapositions by associations, however they phrase it. They're pretty much all saying the same thing that James Webb Young said. An idea is nothing more, nothing less than a new combination of all elements. Now that we know what ideas are, we must devise a method for getting more of them. Happily enough, many such methods have already been devised, and even more happily, these methods are also quite similar. As you can see, the idea of an idea is ironically very elusive. Maybe this is due to the variety of ideas possible because the sky's the limit. Ideas can come in all shapes and sizes, distinguishable based on their context, their meaning, their completeness, their impact. But therein is the paradox. While we have challenges defining ideas, they are essential for progress and innovation. In other words, whether or not we understand what an idea is, whether or not we accept this idea that an idea is just a combination of old ideas into new ones, we still need to figure out how to generate them. As it happens, various scholars have suggested a number of ways to generate ideas. In A Technique for Producing Ideas, James Webb Young, who was mentioned in the last slide, describes a 5-step process for producing ideas. In his view, first, the mind must gather its raw materials, specific knowledge about products, people, and general knowledge about life and events. Second, the mind goes through a process of masticating these materials. Masticating is what we do when we chew. So it's like chewing through those different ideas. Third, you drop the whole subject and put the problem out of your mind as completely as you can. And then fourth, out of thin air, ideas will appear. Fifth, you can take your idea out into the world of reality and see how it fares. Hermann von Helmholtz, a German philosopher, used three steps to get new thoughts. The first was preparation, a time during which he investigated the problem pretty fully in all directions. The second step was incubation, where he didn't think consciously about the idea or the problem at all. And the third was illumination, where happy ideas come unexpectedly without effort, like an inspiration. Moshe F. Rubinstein, a specialist in scientific problem solving at University of California, describes 4 distinct stages to problem solving. First, preparation. You go over the elements of the problem and study their relationships. This is similar to the first and second steps of the previous scholars we've discussed. Stage 2 to him is incubation. Unless you've been able to solve the problem quickly, you sleep on it. Let it just sit there. You may be frustrated at this stage because you haven't been able to find an answer and don't see how you're going to. But then stage 3, inspiration occurs. You feel a spark of excitement as a solution or possible path suddenly appears. Stage 4, verification. You check the solution to see if it really works. In Predator of the Universe, The Human Mind, Charles S. Wakefield says there's a series of 5 mental stages that identify the creative act or the act of coming up with ideas in this context. First is the awareness of the problem. Second comes a defining of the problem. Third comes a saturation in the problem and the factual data surrounding it. Fourth comes a period of incubation and surface calm. Fifth comes this explosion, this insight, this sudden leap beyond object, usually beyond the usual stepping stones to normal solutions. You can see that these models all describe similar processes for coming up with ideas. The first is developing the knowledge base, understanding the problem, understanding information surrounding the problem. The second is letting it just sit and incubate for a while, letting the ideas meld and fester and maybe combine with each other. And then some sort of excitement, spark of insight, spark of knowledge that comes afterwards that allows this idea to be able to sort of burst forth. This involves a lot of conditioning of the mind. The general process for generating idea makes sense and it's helpful for providing clarification about where ideas come from and the processes for creating them. It within and across and beyond organizations, within and outside creative functions. In a similar vein, Dyer, Gregerson, and Christensen, in the article highlighted on your slide, discuss the discovery skills of true innovators, specifically in the business context. You can read that article, and the citation is also provided in your module. In the article by Dyer, Gregerson, and Christensen, the 5 discovery skills identified are associating, questioning, observing, experimenting, and networking. And this gets to the process of how to get ideas within organizations and by individual innovators. What I like about this article is it's focused on individuals rather than necessarily on R&D groups within the larger organization. So we can understand some of the process that we might want to go through if we are to become more innovative ourselves. We can see that these discovery skills map very well onto the first 2 items on the list of characteristics of entrepreneur that we discussed last lesson. We suggested that while these orientations and skills may seem somewhat innate, there's a lot of optimism in the literature that these or elements of them can be learned with practice and focus by people who might not consider themselves to be innovative or innovators or particularly idea prone. As was written in the article by Dyer, Gregerson, and Christensen, quote, studies of identical twins separated at birth indicate their ability to think creatively comes 1/3 from genetics, but 2/3 of the innovation skill comes through learning. First understanding a given skill, then practicing it, experimenting, and ultimately gaining confidence in one's capacity to create. Innovation entrepreneurs in our study acquired and honed their innovation skills precisely this way. In other words, they provide an idea of the series of skills that an individual would need to master if they're to become an innovative entrepreneur. I'd like you to start thinking about how you can implement these sorts of discovery skills in your everyday life to become more idea prone. How can you integrate these into your everyday life? If entrepreneurs, individuals with discovery skills, are central to innovation, where do we find these people? How do we use them? How can we develop them? We may assume, based on celebrity entrepreneurs noted last lesson, that entrepreneurs are typically organizational leaders, like founders and CEOs, presidents, and in some cases they certainly are. But clearly, in other cases, this is not true. For if it was, it would make it very hard to explain the idea people who don't own their own businesses or work for an organization, such as those intrapreneurs or corporate entrepreneurs mentioned earlier. Increasingly, research is finding that idea people are not only concentrated at the top of the organization and aren't only small business owners. These idea people can not only be developed, but they can be found in various places. Like the front lines of organization, Roger Martin, former dean of U of T's Rotman School of Business, highlights the role of frontline workers in the innovation story, suggesting the best creative thinking happens in the front lines of the organization. Martin looks at the case of Intuit, which produced the TurboTax tax return software you might be familiar with. He describes how employees were engaged to move beyond traditional means of business to engage frontline workers to engage them in creative thinking and ideation. We should recognize that the case of Intuit and TurboTax really is based on a product-based environment, but we can draw on this wisdom of how to foster engagement, as it's probably relevant to all environments. You can skim the article above to see how things happened at Intuit and how they created that frontline engagement. Again, we're trying to get down to this idea of where ideas come from and who they come from. We appreciate the fact that entrepreneurs are at the source of innovative ideas, but now we're finding that these entrepreneurs and idea people need not be concentrated only at the top of the organization, but can also be found elsewhere, such as in the front line of organizations. Increasingly, literature is also demonstrating that there are pockets of people throughout an organization that might have great ideas and might not necessarily be in the front lines. Organizations will strive to leverage employees within the organization, But it can be very difficult to get people to work in a way that promotes innovation, as we'll find in a future module. Open innovation methodologies, which you might have heard of, seek to leverage that internal talent towards the firm's innovation objectives from within the organization and with outside partners. This method of open innovation does not discriminate. Employee suggestion schemes, for instance, are gaining stature as a method of generating ideas. That wisdom can lead to new product ideas, changes to operations and efficiencies. Over recent years, open innovation projects have been introduced and gained popularity as companies try to tap into the wisdom of those outside the firm, being the public or from competitors, etc. In other words, there's a general openness towards gaining ideas from a wide array of places other than necessarily the top of the organizations or the front lines, as we discussed in the last slide, but rather from all over the organization and beyond it. New software has evolved which allows ideas to be given, developed, and tracked online so that resources and recognition are also given appropriately when there is some sort of a compensation scheme for coming up to new ideas. This is intended to encourage sharing of ideas and to have those product-centered discussions. Another source of ideas is with lead users. Customers play an important role in the innovation process, academically or from an academic perspective, and practically. Customers obviously are outside the organization, but they're a great source of ideas because they have used the product and in some case are become aficionados. Lead user theory involves tapping into the quote, lead user's mind related to their products. In a 2004 study, Morrison and et al. Identified a number of characteristics of lead users. Lead users typically recognize the requirements of a product early, expect high levels of benefits from a product, develop their own innovations and applications around that product, and are perceived to be pioneering and innovative. The idea of lead users as innovators has gathered influence over time, over the past 30 years. Leaning heavily on work of Erich von Hippel. The perspective holds that because of their expertise in using the product and with the circumstances surrounding the use of a product, lead users are really good sources of insight into product innovation and opportunities. This doesn't, of course, negate the research that privileges the role of technology and innovation driven scientifically. Lead or consumer users are often those who use the products and who use consumer products. For example, in sporting goods, consumers play a really central and somewhat surprising role because they possess really distinctive knowledge and expertise necessary to make products better and to innovate on those products. For example, kite surfing was possible only because of the expertise gained from years of experience from people who were windsurfers. Von Hippel found in his research that when one compares innovations from producers with those of users, frequently those from users are distinctive because of their tacit knowledge they gained from having used the product. Because these people use the products regularly and because the people know the world of using the products as well as the product itself, their innovations are particularly strong. The lead user school further contends that while many users modify products for their own use, for example, computer hardware and software being adapted for industrial process, or high-end sports equipment being adapted for the purposes of the users of those, these innovations tend to be concentrated among the lead users and don't really make it to the masses. So, since lead users are characterized as being ahead of the curve and ahead of majority of users with respect to important market trends, they're also, and they have benefits of the solution, then they're great people to be included in the process of generating market innovations on existing products and services. So by focusing on working with lead users, companies can increase the probability that they'll discover new innovative solutions that they can then leverage and sell to their other mainstream users as well as their lead users. So for companies seeking to increase their capacity to innovate, the Lead User School says that there's a very strong foundation for firm success and for market success by particularly dealing with lead users, a specific subset of the customer base. In the discussion of open innovation, we also mentioned that there's a look towards the public for innovative ideas and perspectives. Crowdsourcing is an idea that was originated by Wired magazine in 2005. And this is a method for outsourcing the generation of ideas, content, support, or other sorts of solutions to crowds, mainly through social media. So crowdsourcing constitutes a really promising method for gathering user ideas that can complement those of the idea seeking methodologies being used within a firm. Um, this is getting much easier due to social media and customers' desire to have their voices heard. Many firms are also providing contests to engage people in the process of contributing to innovation within their product base, market base, competition base, etc. Four common techniques for crowdsourcing that are used are: one, asking customers what they'd like to produce, asking customers what product they would like produced. So, for instance, a toy store wanting to know which Lego would sell fastest, so they can set up a vote and ask the customers directly, and then having a giveaway of some sort. I mean, we could also visualize this happening within a travel environment. A second technique would be asking customers what product they prefer by comparing different types of products. So in the Crocs case of Crocs, the shoes, they had a new release shoes day contest on Facebook that engaged fans by asking what their new shoe is that week, with participating fans having a chance to win Crocs shoes. This, of course, led to customer insight and loyalty. A third technique is to ask customers to name a new product. In 2014, Sony asked the public for help to name its new wireless speaker product on its blog, promoting it on all its social sites through media and other promotional methods. And then 4, ask customers for new product variations. Lay's brand chips, or Walker's Crisps, has hosted contests to engage the public for creating a new crisp flavor idea, obviously in the UK environment. The Lay's Do Us a Flavor contest is one of the most successful new product crowdsourcing campaigns. So we can see that there's many ways to engage the public in the product generation and product and idea generation process within a company regarding its processes, but particularly its products or services. Asking customers what product they'd like produced, ask customers which product they prefer, ask customers to name new products, and ask customers for new product variations are some ways that this can be done. And, through a little bit of research, you can find out that some companies are using rather sophisticated mechanisms of getting this sort of insight from the crowds at large. Of course, there are also opportunities of innovating by looking at ideas in terms of how they might apply to different types of markets and changing the level of products or services being offered. Frugal innovation is a means of accessing markets that otherwise might not be accessed by a firm and its products or services. Often, these unmet market needs, in terms of frugal innovation, would involve the lower end of the market, appealing to customers who prefer a low or no frills experience, offering a version of a premium product without all of the features that make it premium, and therefore being able to access a new market who's less concerned with those premium features. So reducing features and streamlining products can be as fruitful as entering the top of the market with many different new and premium features. We began this lesson by describing the origins of ideas for innovation. Itemizing what an idea is and what it involves is not a simple challenge. It's elusive and it's hard to define this term of ideas. But innovation seems to involve integration of knowledge or known elements into novel configurations. Though the innovation literature is preoccupied with product-based environments, we can see that there's ways to generalize what we discussed in this lesson to all different forms of innovation in various types of environments. When we turned attention to the responsibility of generating new ideas, it seems that much of the responsibility is with R&D teams or executives, or based on the definition of the entrepreneur that's provided in Schumpeter's work and our common understanding of an entrepreneur as the organizational owner or leader. We realize that, that entrepreneurs could be anywhere. and strewn throughout an organization. The entrepreneurs are more characterized by their skill than their position within a particular organization or within society. Various scholars recognize that tapping into organizational employees at all levels, including the front lines, and engaging parties outside the organizations, like customers, competitors, and the general public, can really assist a company in being able to source those ideas. In other words, there's broad recognition that ideas might be somewhat spontaneous, but usually are not, and that they are not neither concentrated with executives nor do they reside at the top level of organizations. And as we can see in upcoming lessons, executive involvement in the ideation process can actually be detrimental to innovation. So in the article cited on the slide, Schrage states that there's wisdom to engaging the various sources of ideas as part of what he calls a larger organizational ecosystem, that rather than privileging insight in a very scattered and sporadic way, or privileging insight from any one source of ideas, depending on any one party for particular ideas, there's merit to formalizing internal and external relationships into a larger system or ecosystem, where there's that, where implicit to it, there's that interaction across different parties and that exposure to different parties by an organization proper seeking new ideas. To briefly recap what we have done in this lesson, we started with recognition that there are lots of different models of innovation that exist, many of which emphasize the interplay between the industry, between research related to the industry, and between the market or customers. That doesn't really provide us a lot of clarity about how exactly we come to get ideas or where the origins of ideas are. And so we want to understand where ideas originate for multiple reasons. In fact, including that we would like to participate in idea generation if and when it's possible. So we stepped back for a moment and we focused on what is an idea. We found that this is a challenging idea to pin down. It's not well defined. There are lots of different definitions, though it seems to be that ideas fundamentally involve some sort of combination of existing ideas and knowledge into new configurations. We came to the conclusion at the end of the discussion of the idea that defining an idea is perhaps less important than being able to generate ideas. So we challenged the idea that the organization can generate ideas. We recognize that an entrepreneur is heavily involved in the generation of ideas, but as we discussed last module, an entrepreneur is not necessarily a business owner or necessarily a top executive. While an entrepreneur can be anywhere throughout an organization, even beyond an organization, in the context of modern day innovation studies. We'd also like to know how we could participate in innovation. Potentially we're not, we don't think of ourselves as that creative or that idea prone. So looking at the discovery skills of the entrepreneurial innovators is helpful because it provides us with some direction about where these ideas come from and what entrepreneurs do in order to create ideas. So as described, the ideas can come from the top of the organization, of course, but it can also come from entrepreneurs throughout the organization and beyond. General public even included, and people with met and unmet needs. Finally, we left the idea that there's some merit to creating an ecosystem that privileges all of the different origins and directions that ideas can come from and all of the ways that innovation can be established and being able to capitalize on that in order to be able to make a difference in an organization and its innovative capacity.